All right, everybody, get ready for a deep dive. We've got some wild stuff happening globally right now.
Yeah.
From conflicts escalating to intelligence agencies battling it out in the shadows.
Oh, yeah.
And even, the threat of nuclear what-ifs hanging over everything.
Yeah.
So consider this your shortcut to getting the rundown on all the key takeaways from what you sent me.
Right. And the thing is, it's amazing how these global things, all tie together. We'll see how a decision in Slovakia could change NATO's whole strategy.
Oh, wow.
And then that loops right back to the conflict in Ukraine.
It's all connected.
It's all connected, yeah.
Okay, so let's start unpacking all of this with what's going on in Ukraine.
All right.
Your sources paint a clear picture that Russia's offensive is intensifying, especially in the Kursk and Kupiansk regions.
Yeah, and these aren't just rumors we're hearing. We're
Right.
seeing these advances confirmed with what's called geolocated images.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, they're satellite images, that can be pinpointed to a spot on the ground.
So they can tell exactly where it is.
Yeah, it helps analysts verify, what's happening in real time.
And what are they seeing?
What we're seeing, it's pretty concerning.
Right.
Russian troops are pushing near a town called Malaya Lonya, and they've crossed the Sel River near Kurilovka, and there's even heavy fighting southeast of Kupiansk.
That sounds intense.
Yeah.
But from what I've read, it seems the Ukrainians kind of knew this was coming.
Right.
One source mentions a Ukrainian commander anticipating the offensive, and there's an interview with a Ukrainian artillery commander describing facing daily barrages of Russian glide bombs.
Wow.
Knowing they were expecting these attacks, how does that affect our understanding of Ukraine's defense strategy?
That's a great question. If they knew this was coming, they've probably been prepping those areas, reinforcing their defenses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like setting a trap. You know the enemy's coming, so you get to choose the battleground, set things up to your advantage. So it shows a certain strategic thinking from the Ukrainians. But it also underlines just how serious these Russian advances are and the detail about the glide bombs.
Yeah.
I mean, that tells you all you need to know about how much force Russia is using.
Right.
This isn't just a casual attack,
Right.
It's a full-on push forward.
It makes General Gerasimov's statement about arms control even more unsettling.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He said, and I quote, "Arms control is a thing of the past."
Wow.
Chilling stuff, considering everything else going on.
It really is, It makes you wonder, what this constant tension, this distrust, does to someone like Gerasimov, right?
Right.
Is this statement a sign of desperation, resignation, defiance?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's really tough to say.
Right.
But his words definitely reflect a super pessimistic view of the future.
And his view is that the West, especially the U.S., has destroyed the trust that's necessary for these arms control treaties.
Yeah, that's his take.
He sees the U.S. as the one causing all this global conflict.
The main instigator, yeah.
Making these agreements pointless. And so his response is to strengthen Russia's ties with countries like China, India, Iran, even North Korea. It's like he's building a whole new power block to counter the West.
It's like a classic move in geopolitics,
Right.
If one group starts shutting you out, you got to find new partners.
Right. To bolster your position?
Exactly.
So Russia's feeling the squeeze, so they're reaching out to anyone willing to work with them.
Even countries they haven't always gotten along with, yeah.
But the U.S., of course, sees things totally differently.
Of course.
They blame Russia for those key treaties falling apart.
Like the ABM and the INF, yeah.
Yep, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty and the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty.
You got to look at the history here, right?
Right.
The U.S. withdrew from the INF in 2019 and the ABM back in 2002.
Yeah.
So this mistrust, this finger-pointing goes way back. It's like a loop of blame and retaliation.
And there's the New START Treaty.
Oh, yeah.
A big one.
Huge.
The last remaining nuclear arms control treaty between the U.S. and Russia.
Right.
Limiting how many strategic nuclear weapons each side could have.
But then in 2023, Putin suspended Russia's participation.
Yeah.
Major setback for arms control.
For sure.
Thankfully, both sides are still sticking to the limits on warheads and missiles and bombers, even with the suspension.
Right.
But the message it sent, you can't ignore that.
Right.
It felt like a step back, a dangerous one.
Gerasimov also expressed concern about the U.S. expanding its military presence in Europe and Asia.
Yeah.
Pointing specifically to missile deployments and strengthened forces in places like the Philippines.
Right.
Could this be feeding into that narrative of, Russia is being cornered?
It's a viewpoint that's definitely gaining ground in Russia. Whether it's completely accurate or not is up for debate. But they see these moves as encirclement.
Right.
They think the U.S. is actively trying to hold them back militarily and economically.
Right.
And that perception, right or wrong, it's a major driver of their actions on the world stage.
He even went as far as to say that the U.S. is directly involved in the Ukraine conflict because they've given Ukraine long-range missiles that had been used to attack Russia.
That's an interesting point he raises.
Right.
When does providing military aid become actually taking part in a conflict?
Yeah.
Where do you draw that line?
It's a debate that's only going to get more important as this conflict and others evolve.
Absolutely.
So Gerasimov is painting a pretty bleak picture.
Yeah, he is.
But then we have this surprising glimmer of hope from another Russian official.
Right, and it's coming from inside the Russian government itself.
Yeah.
Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov has said something, kind of optimistic things about the possibility of the U.S. and Russia getting along better under a different U.S. administration, let's say.
Interesting.
What's fascinating is he's saying this while his colleague Gerasimov is talking about a potential world war. It suggests that maybe there are different camps within the Russian government, different ways they want to approach the West.
Ryabkov actually believes working with a different U.S. administration is possible and that Russia wants to reduce the risk of conflict.
That's what he says.
Is this just wishful thinking? Or is there a real desire to de-escalate things coming from certain parts of the Russian government?
It's hard to know for sure.
Right.
But he did use the word depressing to describe how global security is right now.
Oh.
So it seems like on some level he gets how dangerous things are.
Yeah.
And that could be a starting point for better dialogue.
Maybe. Yeah.
He knows.
He also mentioned Putin being interested in statements about ending the war in Ukraine quickly. Though he admitted there weren't specifics on how.
Of course, all of this was before any contact between Russia and this potential new U.S. administration, so it's all just speculation right now.
Right.
It's like they're testing the liners, trying to see if there's a chance to reset things.
Let's switch gears to something a little more cloak and dagger.
Right.
We were talking about those shadow wars earlier.
Yeah.
And this next story is a perfect example.
Okay.
Ever heard of a scooter bombing?
Not before reading these sources.
Really?
It sounds like something out of a spy movie.
It really does.
Yeah.
So you have this normal-looking scooter,
right,
but rigged with TNT.
Wow.
It takes out Lieutenant General Igor Kirilov.
Oh, wow.
The head of Russia's, get this, radioactive, chemical, and biological defense forces.
Wow.
His assistant was also killed.
This attack shows there's a whole other war happening.
Right.
Alongside the regular fighting we see on the news.
Yeah.
A shadow war between Kyiv and Moscow.
Right.
Fought by their intelligence agencies.
Wow.
And everyone's pointing the finger at the Ukrainian intelligence service, the SBU.
Yeah, I read that.
They say the SBU did this under specific orders.
And they're not exactly backing down from these kinds of operations.
No, they're not.
Even though allies like the U.S. have said they need to reform.
Yeah. One SBU official actually confirmed their involvement.
Wow.
And called Kirilov a war criminal who used chemical weapons against Ukrainians.
Oh, wow.
You see how this kind of talk and these bolder actions are upping the ante in this shadow war?
Right.
It's getting more intense.
So how deep does the SBU's involvement go?
It goes pretty deep.
Really?
They've been operating not just in Russian-occupied areas,
right,
but even inside Russia itself, going back to 2014.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they've been linked to some major attacks.
Oh, yeah.
Like the damage to the Russian Black Sea Fleet and the attack on the Crimean Bridge, the one connecting Russia to Crimea.
Yeah, these are classic examples of hybrid warfare.
Right.
Using regular military tactics and then mixing in things like sabotage, cyber attacks, and information warfare to disrupt and weaken the enemy.
Wow.
And the SBU seems to be playing this game pretty well.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, it's a risky game, unpredictable. You never know how far either side will go.
It feels like, we're slipping back into that Cold War mentality. Yeah. All this posturing, covert ops, that constant undercurrent of, suspicion.
There are definitely some parallels to that era.
Right.
But the big difference this time is the role of information.
Right.
These shadow wars aren't just happening in the dark anymore.
Yeah.
They're playing out on the 24-hour news, on social media.
Yeah.
Everything gets amplified, and that changes things completely.
Which probably makes it even more dangerous.
Yeah.
Public perception, propaganda, they become like weapons.
Powerful ones.
Yeah.
One well-placed leak, a disinformation campaign that's crafted just right.
Yeah.
These can sway public opinion, even influence government decisions.
It's a whole new battleground then.
It is, yeah.
And way trickier than traditional warfare.
Absolutely. It needs a whole different set of tools and strategies.
Right.
It's not just about military might anymore.
Right.
It's about controlling the story.
Mm-hmm.
Dominating the information space.
Yeah.
Mastering, cyber warfare.
So where does all this leave us?
Mm-hmm.
Are we doomed to repeat history's mistakes?
It's easy to get caught up in the doom and gloom, for sure.
Right.
But we don't have to repeat history, We can choose a different path.
Yeah, but how?
Right.
The world feels so divided, even basic facts are debated.
It starts with talking, with being willing to actually listen, even to people we disagree with, and being skeptical, questioning the information we're given, actively searching out different sources, different viewpoints.
So we all need to be like our own intelligence analysts.
Yeah. We need to think critically,
Right.
Sift through the noise, figure out what's real,
Yeah.
be aware of biases, of agendas.
Sounds exhausting.
It can be, but it's also empowering. The more you know, the better you understand what's happening, and the better you can hold those in power accountable.
So where do we even start?
Well, let's go back to one of the big points of tension we talked about, the whole Ukraine joining NATO thing.
Right, with Slovakia dead set against it, Ukraine pushing for it, and NATO kind of stuck in the middle, not sure what to do.
This whole debate is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not just about military alliances.
Right.
It's about identity, security, the future of Europe.
For Ukraine, joining NATO would be like a security blanket.
Yeah.
A guarantee of protection from Russia, solidifying their ties with the West.
And for Russia, it would be like a huge threat.
Right.
Having NATO right there
Yeah.
would make them feel less secure and limit their options.
So you can see why it's such a big deal.
Definitely.
But what about Slovakia? Why are they so against it?
You got to remember Slovakia's history with Russia.
Right.
It's long and complicated.
Yeah.
They were part of the Warsaw Pact during the Cold War.
Oh, right.
There are still strong cultural and economic ties.
So they have that shared history, and maybe even a fear of pushing Russia too far.
Exactly. And then there's the economic side.
Right.
Slovakia relies heavily on Russian energy.
Yeah.
It makes them vulnerable.
So they're trapped.
Yeah, stuck between a rock and a hard place.
So they're walking on a tightrope, trying to balance their own security with their economy.
Right.
And this whole history with Russia.
It's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
And a lot of countries in that region are struggling with it.
It makes you realize there are no easy answers in geopolitics.
Nope.
It's all shades of gray.
Yeah.
It's about finding a way forward that's not too risky, that creates some stability.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand the details.
Yeah.
The history, the different interests at play.
Right.
Without that, we oversimplify things. Black and white solutions that could make things worse.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What should they watch for as this all plays out?
Look for any signs of things escalating or de-escalating.
Right.
Are tensions rising? Yeah.
Is there any hope for diplomacy, for talking?
Yeah.
And be careful of propaganda, disinformation.
Right.
Don't just believe what you hear.
Yeah.
Question everything. Find different perspectives.
Like being our own intelligence analyst.
Exactly. You got to remember, even small things can have huge consequences.
Right.
A little incident on the Ukraine-Russia border could spiral out of control.
If the wrong choices are made,
Yeah.
so stay informed, stay skeptical, and buckle up. This ride's not over yet.
Well said.
Yeah.
And remember, the choices we make, individually and together,
Right.
they can change how things turn out. We're not just watching.
Yeah.
We're part of shaping the future.
Okay, so we've covered a ton in this deep dive.
Yeah, we hype.
From the front lines in Ukraine to those secret intelligence operations to the power struggles between countries.
Yeah.
We've looked at escalating conflicts, shifting alliances, arms control breaking down, the threat of nuclear weapons.
It's been a wild ride through some of the biggest issues facing the world today.
And what stood out to you the most? What are you taking away from all this?
Honestly, it's how connected everything is. That's what's really hitting me. You know, a decision in Slovakia, an attack in Moscow, a statement from a Russian general.
Yeah.
It all ripples out, creating this crazy complex web of cause and effect.
It's wild.
It shows that even things that seem isolated can have a huge impact on the whole world.
Definitely.
Or even more importantly, it shows that we're not just watching this happen.
Right.
We all have a part in shaping the future through our choices, our actions, even just the conversations we have.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Right.
Maybe that's the most important takeaway.
Yeah.
We're not helpless against these global challenges. We can choose to be informed, to be engaged, to actively shape the world we want to live in.
Well, that's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it is.
A huge thank you for guiding us through all this.
You're welcome.
And for helping us understand not just what's happening, but why it matters.
It's been my pleasure, as always.
Right.
The more we know, the better we can handle the challenges we face. And as these tactics, these covert actions become more common, the risk of things going wrong, of things escalating, it just grows like crazy.
Yeah.
Imagine a world where every powerful country
Right.
is constantly testing each other's defenses, doing these shadowy things, trying to twist information to their advantage.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster, honestly.
It kind of is.
It's like a constant state of tension where trust and diplomacy just disappear.
Yeah.
It's like that shadow war we were talking about.
Right.
But on a global scale.
And that's the real danger.
Yeah.
The more we rely on these covert tactics,
Right.
the more we damage the whole system of international order and cooperation.
Yeah.
We create an environment of fear and suspicion.
Right.
Where anything, even something small, could turn into a huge problem.
It's like playing with fire.
Exactly.
But with the whole world at stake.
Yeah.
So how do we stop this? Is there a way to prevent this global shadow war before it's too late?
It's tough, but I think the first thing is to admit there's a problem.
Okay.
We need to bring these covert activities into the light.
Right.
Expose them, hold people accountable,
Yeah. And maybe we need to remember how important it is to talk to each other.
Yeah, diplomacy, dialogue.
Even when it's hard.
Yeah.
Building trust and understanding between countries.
Right.
Even when they don't agree.
That's key.
That has to be a priority if we want to avoid conflict.
Absolutely.
We need to find a way to, rediscover the value of talking, of finding common ground, of solving disagreement peacefully.
Yeah.
If we don't,
Right.
we risk sleepwalking into a future full of suspicion and secrets and the constant threat of things getting worse.
That's a good way to put it.
We've covered a lot today.
We have.
From what's happening on the ground in Ukraine to the world of spies and intelligence agencies,
Right.
to the power plays between countries.
Yeah.
We've explored escalating conflicts, alliances changing, arms control breaking down, the nuclear threat.
It's been a lot.
It's been a deep dive into some of the most important issues facing the world right now.
It really has.
And what stands out to you?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
What are you taking away from all of this?
It's how connected everything is.
Yeah.
That's what's really sinking in.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is.
Like, one thing leads to another,
Yeah. A decision in Slovakia, an attack in Moscow,
Right.
a statement from a Russian general.
It all creates this ripple effect.
Yeah, this complex web of cause and effect.
Exactly.
It shows that even events that seem isolated can have a huge impact on the entire world.
We can.
And maybe even more importantly,
Yeah.
it shows that we're not just watching this happen.
Right.
We all have a role to play in shaping the future through the choices we make, the actions we take, even just the conversations we have.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
That's probably the biggest takeaway.
Yeah, it is.
We're not powerless in the face of these global challenges.
Nope.
We can choose to be informed, engaged, and active in shaping the world we want to live in.
We can.
Okay, so much to think about.
A lot to ponder, yeah.
Huge thanks to you for helping us navigate this complex landscape.
You're welcome.
For helping us understand not just what's happening, but why it matters.
My pleasure. Always happy to do it.
The more informed we are, the better equipped we are to handle these challenges.
Absolutely.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the forces shaping our world.
Yeah.
And maybe even spark some new questions and insights of your own.
Exactly.
Stay curious, stay engaged. Keep asking those tough questions.
Absolutely.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the most fascinating and important issues of our day.
See you then.